Is North Carolina the worst place to work in America? A recent entry at the Locker Room blog asks that question. Its author is Brian Balfour, Senior Vice President of Research at the John Locke Foundation. And this question comes out of a study done by a group called Oxfam America. And basically, Oxfam calls North Carolina the worst place to work.
Yeah, which is really puzzling for starters when you look at North Carolina. North Carolina ranks sixth highest in the nation for domestic inbound migration, net migration. So, I mean, why would people be flocking to a state that's the worst place in the country to work? And there's there's several other shortcomings, shall we say, of the study itself that we can get into in a minute. But right off the bat, when you look at that metric alone, it starts to raise some significant red flags about this conclusions from this report.
You also cite in your blog entry another interesting number that we're kind of in the middle of the pack, 21st lowest unemployment rate in the country.
Yeah. So middle of the pack, and we certainly could use a little bit of improvement, but certainly not reflective of the quote-unquote worst place for workers, the worst state for workers in the country. So there, yet again, another disconnect between the conclusions drawn by this report and the actual facts on the ground.
The report labels North Carolina basically the worst place to work in America, but you point out that is based on some policies rather than actual conditions on the ground, policies dealing with wages, worker protection, and the right to unionize.
Yeah, so the Oxfam, when you start to look at the criteria that they use for their rankings, it's actually more reflective of a left-wing kind of wish list for labor interventions into the labor market, rather than anything reflecting the actual conditions for workers and opportunities for workers. As you mentioned, labor unionization, so North Carolina ranks poorly because it's a right-to-work state. Minimum wage laws, which North Carolina ranks poorly because they're tied still to just the federal minimum wage level of $7.25 per hour. But then when you actually look at the data and understand the concepts behind some of these laws, obviously minimum wage laws, pricing low-skilled people out of the workforce. So that's not good for workers. Right-to-work laws, right-to-work states have, research has shown that right-to-work states have higher rates of employment, job growth, as well as higher rates of income growth. So more jobs and bigger paychecks. That sounds pretty good for workers to me, but this Oxfam study actually grades in the opposite direction.
Yeah, in fact, you point out in several ways that the policies that Oxfam puts forward as being better for workers would actually have the opposite effect.
Right, yeah, and there's other items that they try to use as criteria, like forced paid vacation leave and things of that nature, forced sick days, really just continuing more, they favor more interjection by the government in that relationship between employer and employee, and most of what they're favoring would actually make it more expensive and difficult to hire workers, which of course is going to result in fewer workers being hired.
We're most interested in North Carolina, but you also point out how this report grades other states, and you say that New York and California and Oregon are among those that rate highly, while Alabama and Georgia are among those that rate poorly. But when it comes to employment, basically the opposite is true of what Oxfam's trying to tell us.
Right, yeah. For example, like you mentioned, New York and California are ranked 2 of the 4 best states for workers, except when you look at the unemployment rates, both those states are tied for the second highest unemployment rate in the country. And on the flip side, Georgia, I think it was Georgia and Alabama and Georgia, both enjoy unemployment rates of below 4%, and they're both in the top 10 in those regards in the country. So if you think you're going to put together a ranking for best places to work, you think they might be states that actually are putting people to work.
Yeah, so maybe the policies are good for the people who are sitting around not having a job. I like the last line in this blog entry. It appears like the Oxfam report more closely reflects the best states for creating unemployment than creating good places to work. It seems like a good summary of this report.
Yeah. It actually, I appreciate you bringing that up because, again, getting back to looking at the actual numbers, the facts on the ground are completely the inverse of what this Oxfam report is trying to produce. And again, I think this report is just based more on a left-wing kind of progressive ideological wish list for interventionist policies, rather than actually reflecting which states are doing the best at creating jobs, creating opportunities, and creating income growth for workers, which is what we really want to try to see. Rather than the intentions of these policies, we want to actually look at the results of which states are creating more opportunities for workers. And this Oxfam report gets it absolutely backwards.
If you'd like to learn more, once again, you can head to the John Locke Foundation's blog, The Locker Room, and look for this post, Is North Carolina the Worst Place to Work in America? Its author is Brian Balfour, Senior Vice President of Research at the John Locke Foundation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mitch.